So Andreas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I thought we'd just start off by I'm just going to ask you a bit about your background and how you came into procurement.
Of course. I started in procurement in 2008, so just in the midst of the global financial crisis. It was a very interesting time. As a consultant working for a company that had a big contract with the government. And being on site at the government taught me a lot about processes and compliance, as well as some of the systems that most companies use. So they were using Ariba for the first time.
Right.
That was my first gig in procurement itself, and I've been doing it ever since. It was really, really great.
And how did you think your background and your studies coming into that kind of prepared you for procurement, or did you know much about it coming into the industry? Or?
I did. I studied a lot of supply chain subjects. In fact, my minor degree is in what used to be logistics. Today people call it supply chain. As part of my major in industrial engineering. So throughout uni, I was very much aware of the different processes as part of the supply chain, and procurement being one of those core activities, and it was something that interested me from the start. And I guess when I moved to Australia to do my master's degree in supply chain, I became more interested in it for the commercial aspect. I have a lot of love for supply chains and warehousing and transport and networks and things like that, but the engagement with people, the engagement with stakeholders, the engagement with our clients internally, with suppliers, was something that I really wanted to get into. And it made perfect sense to adapt my supply chain credentials to a commercial role and get into procurement. So it was not falling into procurement, falling in love with it.
Right. And can you tell me a bit about the roles you've had in procurement over time?
Sure. The first role, I was a buyer, which meant that I was focused on transactional purchases of particular goods and services. In this case, it was all services. We were buying white-collar contract labor for government. And in that role, I learned the basics of getting POs, the workflows, the documentation that goes along with it, the systems and how to use them. And we progressed through different utilization of the technology to get competition and incentivize suppliers to give us a better rate. We used a collaboration function, which is kind of state of the art still in terms of doing low value transactions that wouldn't be covered by traditional big sourcing activity. And moving through there, I got into a compliance and project management role, working for one of the large banks. They were looking for someone who had an understanding of the systems, had an understanding of the policies and the processes. So my previous experience, having been a consultant in government, fit perfectly. And went in and helped them put in place a few system solutions to automate some of the activities that they had to do to comply with their internal policies, and also ran the project management office so that the pipeline of activity for the one particular year that we were working on could be tracked as a project. So we could have milestones, we could have people who were responsible, we could track the risks as well as the opportunities arising from the different activities. And we had to report that to our EGM of procurement and property at the time. So it made it a really interesting wide range of activities that got me into everyone's portfolio, helped me understand what different teams were delivering, and also what the expectations from our senior leadership were. And from there, an opportunity just came up to join the category management team as a procurement category manager for professional services. And it helped because I had done sort of that buying role on white-collar contract labor, so I had an understanding of the supply base. I had been a consultant, so we were working with also the big consulting houses. And the aggregation of those different things helped me have a really good chance at delivering value in that portfolio. And I did that job for a couple of years. And really set the stage for the rest of my career. I think it's probably one of the turning points, in fact, that I went from having done buying and policy to the actual commercial delivery in that short space of time. From there, again, moved into another bank, did different categories, focused on different aspects of the operation. It was as close as you would get to direct procurement within banking. So we were doing a lot of things that had a direct impact on our operations. Dealing with oligopolistic suppliers, for example. So in the market data space, there are about 3 companies that provide the data services that you see all the traders using their big screens. So working with those suppliers required some different approaches and different skills, and really enjoyed that. And then moving from there, I decided that I wanted to do something that would be a little bit within the finance space, but outside of banking, so I didn't get pigeonholed as a one-trick pony.
Yep.
And I went into insurance, and insurance again was completely different. We were dealing with builders, restoration companies, people who provided contents. So if you think about anything that is inside your home that is protected by insurance, all the suppliers for that have very different sort of expectations and very different price points and very different negotiation tactics when it comes to getting value. And also understanding that the things that we were doing from a procurement perspective had a direct impact on the end customer. Because if you sourced a particular product, it was something that people were going to have in their home, and they were going to hopefully enjoy the experience of having it returned to them promptly. People think that insurers like declining people's claims, when in fact for us the best thing that could happen was that we could get that claim covered and responded to and delivered to in the shortest amount of time. So that was a challenge for us to make sure that our customers were happy, and it was a fantastic experience. And after that, the opportunity came to be a leader, to work with different people in an organization that has all sorts of services, that serves all sorts of industries. So we provide services for defense, provide services for the private sector in resources. We maintain water infrastructure, telecommunications networks, power networks, run prisons. So we do many different things, and that was only possible because of all the different parts of the puzzle that I had covered off in my early career. Understanding the policy, understanding the systems, understanding how to change hats and move from one category to the other. And here I am.
Wow. Yeah, so you've had some pretty diverse experience across industries and across private and public sectors. What are some of your observations regarding the differences across the different sectors, regarding their approaches and maybe the levels of sophistication as well?
I think that public sector actually has a lot of sophisticated processes and policies because of the governance aspects that relate to the requirements of managing people's tax dollars going into the expenditure. Their robustness in process, in policy, in compliance, and the focus on making sure that people are doing the right thing is second to none. I've never seen anyone do it any better than the government does in that space. That can come at a bit of a compromise when it comes to focusing on the actual value delivery and the value identification. And it also may come as a challenge to engage with stakeholders when they feel that there's a particular mandate that they have to obey. But if you're good in your role and you're good at influencing people, they'll start to see that it's not so much about the how as it is about the why, and the why those things matter, and especially because we're all taxpayers. So you'd want to see that. So I'd say public sector policy processes, really great. Public sector is not as difficult as most people would have it. I worked for 2 very large banks, and I found that in banking, the time that it took to do things wasn't all that different to government.
Right.
But in government, you would be doing these things for a compliance purpose. In the private sector, I found that a lot of the processes you would follow were more related to, let's say, risk mitigation, because risk is a really big thing in banking, as well as ensuring that there's value creation and demonstrating that value. So those focus areas are a little bit different, and the length of time that things took to demonstrate those were comparable to the process that you would have to follow in government. The systems that you can find in some companies in the private sector are pretty much the same as you would find in the public sector. But for example, in my current role, our focus on the delivery of value for the organization is incredibly sharp. So very different to managing risk, yes, create some value, or here are some processes that you should follow. We are absolutely driven to deliver value to our organization because we're in a difficult market. There's a lot of competition and there's very low margins in what we do. So the focus in making sure that you run competitive processes, that you have the right pricing, that you are utilizing technology to the best possible potential is huge for us.
Right. And so with your masters, you've obviously done some further education in the procurement area. What would your observations and key takeaways be on some of the key skills and attributes you see being necessary for today's procurement professional?
That's a very good question. For someone to be successful in procurement, you have to be a people person. I remember when I started, there was a lot of focus in highlighting how much spend you managed. So you would say, oh, I manage a portfolio of 200 million. If you think about professional services and banking, my portfolio in one of my first category roles was over $300 million. Now, is that an adequate assessment of the size of the portfolio versus the complexity that it had? The reality is we manage relationships. We manage people and how they need their procurement requirements met. And so if you're very good at building strong first name basis, amicable conversation type relationships with people, you can talk about all the difficult stuff and still be on people's good books. So it's not so much, like I said, about here's how you must do things, but here's why you're doing things, and making sure that people want to work with you. And that comes through a combination of demonstrating your expertise. So I would say that that's the second skill. You do have to have the ability to deliver something from end to end. So you have to be able to work with people to develop a good requirement, to develop good evaluation criteria, to run the right type of process. It's not just running tenders for tender's sake, but also think about direct source negotiations, reverse auctions, joint supplier development, and joint opportunities with the market, so that you pick the right way of delivering to what the specification was at the start. And then the third, I would say, most important skill or characteristic people would need to have is be able to be good with numbers, good at analyzing the numbers, and good at hitting the numbers. You have to be able to take the spend of your organization, understand where the key players are, and then be very driven to deliver on those numbers. Because if you're working in private sector, for example, one of your key KPIs will always be the delivery of value, and you quantify that numerically most of the time. So I'd say between that numerical capability, that drive to deliver on the numbers, the ability to do things end to end and have the skills, the hard procurement skills to run the right processes and do the right thing, and then to engage with your stakeholders and get that buy-in and continual support from them as much as you support them is core.
That's great, because we've seen a lot of talk recently around, especially kind of skills in negotiation and understanding your stakeholder interests and needs as well.
Absolutely, and you talk of something very important. Negotiation is fundamental if you're working in procurement with suppliers, but I think it's even more important when you talk about dealing with your stakeholders.
Yeah.
I would fit it into that first space because you don't have any authority over them. You're not their manager, you're probably not necessarily even more senior than they are, yet here you are trying to sway them in a particular way and to go for a particular solution or try a particular procurement approach. So if you think about it, half of the negotiation, if not more, is done internally and is done with those individuals. And that is a negotiation that you can't afford to lose. You can't lose the support of your stakeholders because they're the ones that hold the budget and want the goods. If you were to lose either of those things, then you don't have a procurement. You don't have an activity to follow. So you're right. You have to be able to influence without authority and get to people's outcome at the same time as not compromising on the commercial benefit for the organization and the compliance processes that you may have.
And you've obviously come up to just over 10 years now in your career.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to someone today who was deciding maybe to go into procurement, or this was maybe trying to decide whether this is the profession for them?
I think, first of all, I said I love procurement and I want people to go into procurement. So I would say start with talking to someone who works in procurement. but not only talking to someone who works in procurement, but works in a particular role or a particular industry where you want to go in. And I think that, very importantly, a lot of the career moves that people make are not necessarily as structured as they could be.
Right.
That is, you can have a career plan and follow a particular path that you want to, get to. But if you focus on your ability to meet different milestones, and you focus on your ability to get to different industries, different types of categories, different types of roles, you'll find that you will curate your experience. And what I mean by that is you can spend a lot of time doing the same thing, or you can spend that same amount of time doing different things that enriches your CV further to be the better professional in the end. There are people who value individuals who have extensive experience in one role. In my opinion, you should curate your CV in order to get what you need to get out of the role, get what you need to get out of the industry, get what you need to get out of those categories, and then move on to the next challenge that is going to help you be the better rounded version of yourself towards whatever your goal is. In my particular case, I wanted to cover all the fundamental food groups in procurement. So I wanted to cover direct and indirect procurement. I wanted to have some exposure to IT, and most recently I wanted to have exposure to MRO, and I made conscious decisions to go into organizations that offered me those categories. I also wanted to have a role that allowed me to be in a commercial activity. I wanted to have roles that allowed me to be in leadership. So I've been very focused on those particular outcomes for myself and being selective around what my next step would be. So if you're starting, map out what you want to do. Know that life will throw you curveballs. I was made redundant from my first role when I was very young, and I learned that really quickly. But as long as you have an objective in mind, you'll always find your way. And if you have those skills that we were just talking about, you will find yourself in demand. There's so much demand for procurement people at the moment. It doesn't matter what cycle the economy is in. If it's down, you'll need to save money. If it's up, you still need to save money. You still need to deliver value to the organization, however they come to define it. So we're here to stay.
And just as a final question, where do you see procurement going in the future?
I love that question. I have a lot of theories, and these are all, of course, very personal. But you'll find that procurement has a lot of steam left in it in the world of supplier relationship management. And that's been a practice that's been around for a really long time, but there's still so much that you can do. And it's how to extract that value over time from your existing suppliers. So beyond the traditional, here's a contract that I've put in place and here are the benefits that I think we'll get out of this particular contract. It's how we will sustain that value and increase that value. If you think about your suppliers, they're achieving efficiencies all the time. Are they passing these efficiencies on to you? If your suppliers are innovating in their space, are you seeing those innovations coming through? Because sometimes through complacency, either from you or from your suppliers or both, you don't get to see either of those things. Another potential route for procurement, I would say, is in technology. And everything that we do today is being affected by technology, and it'd be foolish to think that technology isn't going to become a bigger part. I would hope that there's a lot of automation introduced in a lot of the processes that people don't enjoy in procurement. That is the use of guided buying, the use of automatically generated goods receipts and automating payments, the use of non-release contracts where you don't have to raise POs for certain types of contracts. These technologies will enable a better experience for the user, and technologies around artificial intelligence, and I know that gets thrown around a lot, but to interpret data, to manage and extract information, not just data, out of the masses of information that you have is very, very important and will be even more important moving forward. And I think the last thing is on the diverse and sustainable front of procurement. If I were to pick my direction in any of those three streams that I just talked about, I would go down that space because it's where procurement can do such great good. Not only are you delivering value for your organization with money that you were going to be spending anyway, but you are putting investment back into the communities that your company is part of. And you're helping people who are not interested in a handout. They're not interested in charity. They just want to build a business that allows them to have a positive life just like everyone else. So if you think about using social enterprises, disability enterprises, indigenous procurement, and all the other wonderful forms of diverse procurement, as well as looking after people in your supply chain to make sure that you're free of modern slavery and all these other horrible things that plague the world that we live in, I think your impact as a procurement function, as a procurement person, and to the greater good of our communities will be much, much higher than if you focused solely on the numbers and on the policies and processes.
Great. Some great opportunities and potential things to take advantage of.
Absolutely. Years to come.
Thanks again, Andres.
Thank you, Jen.